6 months after Chernobyl sent radioactive fire into the sky, the world was about to experience a second nuclear catastrophe. This time in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. And the only thing standing between humanity and disaster? A 20-year-old sailor who volunteered to walk into a reactor chamber that was melting down. This is the story of the K-219. And the man who gave his life to stop World War III. October 3, 1986. 600 miles northeast of Bermuda. The Soviet ballistic missile submarine K-219 was on routine patrol, carrying 16 ballistic missiles and 30 nuclear warheads. Enough firepower to incinerate a continent. It was the Cold War. The stakes were absolute. But the K-219 was old. It had been pushed hard for 15 years. One of its missile tubes had already been welded shut after a previous chemical leak. And now, 680 miles from American shores, disaster struck. At 5:14 in the morning, an officer spotted water seeping from the plug of missile tube number 6. A seal had failed. Seawater was mixing with the missile's liquid fuel. The reaction was instant. The chemicals produced heat, toxic gas, and eventually, an explosion. The missile, fully armed with its nuclear warhead, was ejected straight out of the submarine while underwater. The blast tore through the hull. 2 sailors died instantly. The K-219 dropped like a stone. From a cruising depth of around 130 feet, the submarine plunged past 985 feet in minutes. Corrosive chlorine gas filled every compartment. The crew fought to stop the descent. Damage control teams worked by flashlight with gas masks. Somehow, they brought the submarine back to the surface on battery power. But the nightmare wasn't over. The explosion had damaged the reactor control lines. The automatic shutdown system had failed. Now, inside the belly of the ship, the reactor temperature was climbing. Coolant levels were dropping. A nuclear meltdown was imminent. In the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. 6 months after Chernobyl. Reactors go critical. They don't just stop. The graphite control rods had to be inserted manually to absorb the neutrons. And the only way to do that was to enter the reactor compartment itself. The temperature inside was 70 to 80 degrees Celsius. The air was thick with choking acid fumes. Zero visibility. And gamma radiation that would burn through the crew's protective suits in minutes. They didn't have radiation gear, they were wearing flame-retardant coveralls. 2 sailors went in first. Nikolai Belikov and Sergei Preminin. The 20-year-old from a tiny village in northern Russia. They dropped 3 of the 4 control rods into the reactor. But by then, Belikov had passed out from the heat and fumes. His lungs were seared by the acid air. He would die later. Now it was just Preminin. Alone. Inside a nuclear oven. 1 more rod to go. He wrestled with the 4th control rod. But the heat had warped its casing. The guide rail had deformed. It wouldn't budge. He ran out to catch his breath, then ran back in. His lungs were burning. His vision was fading. His muscles were screaming. On his second attempt, he forced the rod into position and it clicked. The reactor shut down. There would be no second Chernobyl. No radioactive cloud spreading across the Atlantic. No environmental catastrophe that would have poisoned the coastlines of 2 superpowers. Sergei Preminin had saved not just his crewmates. He'd saved millions of lives. He turned to leave. The hatch had warped shut. The intense heat and pressure inside the compartment had sealed it like a vacuum lock. His crewmates pounded on it from the other side. They couldn't open it. He was trapped inside a boiling, gas-filled chamber. He had one final communication with his captain. He reported that the reactor was shut down. Then he was gone. He died alone, surrounded by the reactor he'd just saved, 5 days before his 21st birthday. But the K-219 was still dying. Toxic gas continued spreading through the boat. The crew retreated to the bow and stern as compartments sealed off behind them. A Soviet merchant ship arrived to tow the submarine home, a 4,300-mile journey across the Atlantic. But the tow cable broke. Twice. On October 6, 3 days after the explosion, the K-219 sank into the Hatteras abyss. 18,000 feet down. It broke into 2 pieces on the ocean floor. 15 ballistic missiles and 30 nuclear warheads are still down there today. And here's what makes this story even darker. In the aftermath, Soviet leadership investigated the crew for sabotage. Captain Igor Bratov was charged with negligence, sabotage, and treason. He was accused of abandoning his submarine without cause. At a Politburo meeting on October 6, Mikhail Gorbachev himself asked, Could this have happened due to lack of competence of the crew? Or because of cowardice? The transcript is chilling. Gorbachev repeatedly voiced suspicion that the accident was no accident. That the crew had panicked. Or worse, that Western intelligence had somehow sabotaged the submarine. But the evidence didn't support it. The water leaking into the missile tube was the same accident that had happened on this submarine 13 years earlier. The hull had been damaged. The welding was poor. And when the explosion came, there was nothing the crew could have done to stop it. Britauf was eventually cleared of all charges. But he never served on a submarine again. Now here's the part that still haunts this case. Preminin's death was kept secret for 15 years. The Soviet statement after the accident said 3 sailors had died. They never mentioned the 20-year-old who went into a nuclear oven to save them all. It wasn't until 1997 that Boris Yeltsin awarded him the title Hero of the Russian Federation. 11 years after his death, why the silence for so long? Because the Soviet Navy didn't want the world to know that their equipment was falling apart. That their submarines were death traps. That a 20-year-old kid from nowhere had to manually save a strategic nuclear submarine because the automatic systems had all failed. And there's one more layer to this story that the official reports don't tell you. The K-219 had been struck by a previous chemical leak in 1973. The same missile tube. The same seal failure. That earlier leak had killed 1 sailor and nearly destroyed the vessel. And what did the Soviet Navy do? They welded that tube shut and ignored the design flaw. They sent the submarine back out on nuclear patrol. Year after year. So on October 3, 1986, it happened again. And this time, Sergei Preminin paid the price. He didn't die in combat. He died because of a faulty seal that should have been fixed 13 years before he ever stepped foot on that submarine. And here's the question that still haunts his story: did they ever fix the rest of the fleet? The K-219 was just one submarine. The Soviet Navy had dozens more with the same design flaws. How many other near catastrophes were covered up? The K-219 sits at the bottom of the Atlantic today. 18,000 feet down. Its nuclear warheads are still there. The reactor core is still there. And unless someone goes down to retrieve them, they will eventually corrode and leak into the ocean. The Soviet Navy knew this in 1986. They said it would take decades, but the process has already begun. Sergei Preminin died to stop a meltdown. But the warheads he tried to protect are still down there. And they're still dangerous. He was 20 years old. He didn't get to go home. He didn't get to have a life. But he made a choice that saved his crew, and saved the world, in one of the most dangerous moments of the Cold War. This is Lost Timeline.